The morning was supposed to be filled with excitement. I had spent 2 years saving every penny, working extra shifts, and carefully planning every last detail of this trip. A once-in-a-lifetime, all-expenses-paid luxury vacation for my parents and me. We were going to Europe, a dream we had talked about since I was a kid. And today finally was the day we were leaving. I pulled up to my parents' house at exactly 6 a.m., right on schedule. The anticipation had me buzzing, my heart light with the satisfaction of knowing I had done something meaningful for them. As I stepped out of the car, my mother was already waiting on the porch, her suitcase beside her, a warm smile on her face. "You're late," she said playfully as she stepped down. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. 6:02 a.m. 2 minutes late. "Mom," I laughed, rolling my eyes. "I think we'll survive." Then I saw her. My sister Lauren stepped out of the house, dragging her own suitcase behind her. My smile faltered. Something wasn't right. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though my stomach had already dropped. Mom exchanged a glance with my father before turning back to me with an expression that was far too cheerful for what I was about to hear. "Oh, sweetheart," she said almost dismissively. "We decided Lauren should come instead of you." The words didn't register at first. "Instead of me?" I repeated slowly, blinking in disbelief. Lauren, ever the opportunist, smirked. "Mom and Dad thought I needed this trip more than you. I've been really stressed lately, and you're always working, so they figured you could take another vacation later." I stared at them, my pulse pounding in my ears. "But I paid for this. I planned everything. This was supposed to be our trip." Mom waved a hand, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Don't make this a big deal, Violet. Your sister really needs a break. You'll understand." Lauren didn't even have the decency to look guilty. She just shrugged. "Thanks for understanding, sis." I clenched my jaw, biting back the storm of emotions threatening to boil over. I could have fought. I could have screamed. But something inside me clicked in that moment. It didn't matter what I said. They had made their decision. They had always made their decision when it came to Lauren. "Fine. If that's what you want," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Let's get going." They didn't notice the shift in my tone. The drive to the airport was suffocating. Lauren spent the entire ride gushing about the trip, making comments about shopping in Paris and sightseeing in Rome like she had personally spent 2 years planning every detail. My mom chimed in, assuring her there would be plenty of time for shopping, while my dad sat quietly in the back seat, not even attempting to meet my gaze. Finally, as we pulled up to the terminal, my patience snapped. "You know what?" I said, putting the car in park. "Enjoy your trip." I stepped out and unloaded their bags with an eerie efficiency. My mom kissed my cheek, thanking me for being so understanding, and Lauren grinned, already absorbed in her phone as she walked toward the entrance. They didn't look back. But they should have. Because they were about to get a surprise they would never forget. As soon as I got home, I walked straight to my laptop and logged into every single travel account I had used to book their trip. Hotel reservations? Cancelled. Private guided tours? Refunded. First-class airline upgrades? No. I sat back, watching the cancellation emails flood my inbox, feeling the tightness in my chest finally start to ease. If they wanted to take Lauren instead of me, fine. But they weren't going to do it on my dime. I shut my laptop and exhaled. They would figure it out soon enough. The first call came just as their plane landed. My phone buzzed relentlessly as I unpacked the suitcase I had carefully packed for myself. My suitcase for my trip. The irony wasn't lost on me as I placed my unworn outfits back in my closet, one by one. I ignored the first few calls. Then the text messages started. "Mom, Violet, what's going on? The hotel won't let us check in. The reservation is missing. Mom, call me immediately. Mom, Violet, this isn't funny. Fix this now." A laugh bubbled up in my throat before I could stop it. Fix this. I had been fixing things my entire life. Fixing family problems, fixing Lauren's mistakes, fixing relationships that were one-sided. Not anymore. The phone rang again. This time it was Lauren. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message, her voice dripping with entitlement. "Violet, this is so petty. We're stuck here because of you. You need to call the hotel and fix it now." I rolled my eyes and deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. The calls kept coming. I let them ring. For the first time in my life, I didn't answer. I woke up the next morning feeling lighter than I had in years. No responsibilities, no obligations, and most importantly, no guilt. My phone, however, was still blowing up. The missed calls had doubled overnight. My voicemail inbox was full. And my messages were flooded with texts ranging from outrage to desperation. Mom, Violet, this is unacceptable. You left us stranded. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Dad, call us back now. This has gone too far. Lauren, you're being a brat. Fix this before I lose my mind. I took a sip of coffee and watched the notifications pile up. It was almost comical. These were the same people who, just 24 hours ago, had decided I wasn't important enough to be on the trip I had planned. But now they needed me. I let them stew. By midday, the messages took a different turn. Mom. Okay, we're willing to talk. Just call us so we can sort this out. Dad, Violet, you've made your point. We need to fix this. Call me. Lauren. I swear to God, I will never forgive you for this. That one made me laugh. Forgive me? As if I had been the one to betray someone. As if I had been the one to push someone aside like they were nothing. By the afternoon, my curiosity got the better of me. I picked up my phone and clicked on one of my mom's voicemails. Her voice was frantic, laced with desperation. Violet, please. This has all gone terribly wrong. The hotel said there's no reservation, we couldn't check in, and all the other places nearby are fully booked. We had to stay in some budget hotel last night, and it was awful. You have to call the hotel and sort this out. I don't understand why you're being like this. This isn't who you are. There it was, the guilt trip. The subtle manipulation to make me the villain. I deleted the voicemail before it could continue. The next one was from my father. Violet, this is getting ridiculous. We're exhausted, we can't even access half the things we were supposed to do because everything was in your name. Your mother is beside herself, and Lauren. He sighed, as if he couldn't even bring himself to say what was wrong with her. Just call me. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I had every right to be angry. I had every right to cut them off completely. But there was a small bitter part of me that wanted to hear them say it. That wanted to know just how badly they were suffering. So I called. My mom picked up on the first ring. Violet, she exclaimed, sounding both relieved and furious at once. What the hell is wrong with you? Why would you do this to us? I took another sip of coffee. Do what exactly? The hotel won't let us in, she snapped. The airline says the upgrades were revoked. The tours? Gone. You canceled everything, didn't you? Yes, I said simply. A stunned silence filled the line. Then, how could you? Oh, I don't know, Mom. Maybe the same way you decided Lauren deserved my trip more than I did. She spluttered. That's different. She needed this. And I didn't? My voice was calm but sharp. I spent years planning this trip for you. I worked overtime. I saved every penny I could to make this perfect. And at the last second, you threw me aside like I didn't matter. We didn't throw you aside, she argued, but the guilt was creeping into her tone now. We just thought you'd understand. Funny how I'm always expected to understand, but Lauren never is. She sighed heavily, but before she could speak, Lauren's voice came through the background. Is that her? Give me the phone. There was a shuffle, and suddenly Lauren was on the line, her voice dripping with fury. You are such a bitch, Violet. I laughed. And you're shocked that I finally fought back? You ruined this trip, she shrieked. Do you know how embarrassing this is? We had to downgrade everything. I had to eat at a buffet last night, do you hear me? A buffet. I rolled my eyes. Lauren, you were fine taking my spot on the trip I planned, but now you have to deal with the consequences of that choice. Enjoy Europe. Violet. I hung up. My phone immediately started ringing again. I silenced it and went about my day. The messages changed tone again by the next morning. Mom, Violet, I'm sorry. Please call me. Let's fix this. Dad, we just want to talk. Lauren, whatever. I don't even care anymore. That last one made me smile. They were scrambling now, trying to figure out what to do. And for the first time in my life, I was watching them struggle without rushing in to help. I had done everything for this family. And when I needed them to appreciate that, they had chosen Lauren just like they always did. Now they could figure it out on their own. The third day of silence should have been comforting, but instead it felt like the calm before a storm, as if my parents and Lauren were regrouping, gathering their strength before making one last desperate push to get me to fold under their demands like I always had in the past. But I was different now. Something inside me had shifted, hardened, and I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their endless cycle of favoritism and manipulation, no matter how much they begged or how many guilt-laced messages they sent my way. My phone had been lighting up all morning with missed calls, each one more persistent than the last, but I didn't pick up, not yet, because I wanted to see just how far they would go before they realized that I wasn't playing their game anymore, that I had finally irrevocably changed the rules. By midday, I finally let my curiosity win and clicked on one of my mom's voicemails, expecting the same exhausted frustration, the same condescending attempt to make me feel small for daring to stand up for myself. But instead, what I got was something different: panic, desperation. The sharp edge of someone who had run out of options and didn't like it one bit. "Violet," she started, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't know what you were thinking, but we can't keep going like this. Your father and I, had to book a last-minute room in a terrible hotel, and your sister is absolutely miserable, and we can't even get into half of the places we were supposed to because everything was booked under your name and—" She took a deep breath, steadying herself before continuing in a colder, clipped tone. "You've made your point, okay, but this isn't fair and you need to fix it now." I stared at my phone for a long moment before deleting the message without responding. Because what was there to say? That she was right? That I felt bad? Because I didn't. I felt something else entirely, something foreign but undeniably satisfying. Freedom, the kind that came when you finally let go of people who had spent years taking you for granted. The next voicemail was from Lauren, her voice a mixture of anger and disbelief, as if she couldn't quite comprehend that I had the audacity to defy her, that I had dared to put myself first for once in my life. "Violet," she snapped, her words clipped and filled with venom. "This is so beyond petty. You seriously left us stranded and Mom and Dad are freaking out, and I have no idea why you think this is okay, but you need to call the hotel back and fix it because this is a nightmare, and I swear to God if you don't." I cut off the message before she could finish, shaking my head because even now when the consequences of their actions were slapping them directly in the face, she still believed that I was the villain in this story, that I was the unreasonable one, that I was the one who had done something wrong. I didn't bother listening to my dad's message because I already knew exactly what it would say. He would be the mediator, the one who tried to be the reasonable voice, the one who pretended like this was just a misunderstanding rather than the natural result of years of mistreatment. And I had no interest in playing along. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee, grabbed my laptop, and did something I should have done a long time ago. I booked myself a new trip, a better trip, a trip that was truly mine without the burden of dragging along people who didn't appreciate me, who only saw me as an ATM with a pulse, a problem solver, a safety net, rather than a person with feelings and dreams of her own. Italy. A week of luxury hotels, guided tours, fine dining, and absolute, glorious solitude. No family drama, no condescending remarks, no passive-aggressive guilt trips. Just me, myself, and the adventure I had always wanted but had been too afraid to take alone. I confirmed the reservations and sat back, a slow, satisfied smile creeping onto my face, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone else's approval. I wasn't seeking validation from people who would never give it to me. I wasn't bending over backward to make people who didn't respect me feel comfortable. I was doing this for me. That night my dad called again, and this time I picked up, because I wanted to see if maybe he had finally understood what I had been trying to tell them for years. "Violet," he started, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "We need to end this nonsense. Your mother is beside herself and Lauren." I cut him off before he could launch into whatever sob story he had prepared. "Dad, if you're calling to try to guilt me, don't bother, because it's not going to work." He sighed heavily, as if I was the one being difficult. "This isn't who you are, Violet, you're better than this." I laughed, shaking my head even though he couldn't see me. "You know, it's funny because I was just thinking the same thing about you." There was a long silence before he finally spoke again, this time softer, but no less condescending. "So what do you want? Do you want us to apologize? Do you want us to beg?" I let out a slow breath, considering my words carefully before responding. "I don't want anything from you, Dad, because I've finally realized that I don't need anything from you. Not your approval, not your validation, and certainly not your guilt." "Violet, come on." "No." I interrupted, my voice steady and unshakable. You come on, Dad. You and Mom and Lauren made a choice. You decided that I wasn't important enough to be part of this trip, and now you're dealing with the fallout of that choice, and for once in my life I'm not going to be the one to clean up your mess. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, until finally he exhaled sharply and muttered, I don't even know who you are anymore. I smiled. I do. And it feels amazing. And then I hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel regret. I felt free. Because for the first time in my life I had chosen me. And that was just the beginning. The morning of my departure for Italy arrived sooner than expected, and as I stood in my kitchen, sipping the last of my coffee before heading to the airport, my phone buzzed one final time, displaying a name I had memorized long ago, a name that should have made me feel warmth but instead only filled me with an exhausted sort of amusement. Mom. I watched the screen for a few seconds, debating whether I should pick up, wondering if there was anything left to say, but ultimately I let it go to voicemail, knowing exactly what kind of message she would leave, knowing it would be laced with guilt, carefully crafted to make me feel as if I had been the one to shatter our family's dynamic rather than simply refuse to be its scapegoat any longer. As I checked in at the airport and made my way through security, my thoughts lingered on how different this trip felt from the one I had initially planned. No shared itineraries, no careful accommodations for everyone else's preferences, no compromises for the sake of peace. This time everything was mine, every decision, every detail, every indulgence, and for the first time in my life I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to question whether I deserved it. Boarding the plane felt surreal, as if I was stepping into a different reality, one where I was no longer bound by invisible chains of obligation, one where I didn't have to justify my happiness, one where I wasn't conditioned to shrink myself to make room for others. The moment I landed in Rome, the past seemed to dissolve behind me, left thousands of miles away with the endless missed calls and texts, buried under layers of old expectations I had finally peeled away. The sights, the sounds, the energy of the city filled me with an intoxicating sense of liberation, and as I checked into my 5-star hotel, a reservation I had made only for myself, with no concern for anyone else's needs, I felt something shift inside me, something that had been dormant for far too long, something that felt dangerously close to joy. The first few days were an exquisite blur of exploration and indulgence, leisurely strolls through cobblestone streets, spontaneous visits to museums I had never planned to see, long afternoons sipping espresso at cafes where no one was waiting for me to return, and lavish dinners where I didn't have to pretend to enjoy anyone's company but my own. It was on the 4th day that I finally checked my messages, not out of obligation but out of curiosity, wondering just how far my family had unraveled in my absence, wondering if they had finally come to terms with the fact that I was no longer the Violet they had so easily cast aside. Unsurprisingly, the texts had shifted tones, morphing from initial anger and desperation into something else entirely. My father's messages were infrequent now, carefully neutral, as if he wasn't quite sure whether to apologize or double down on his disappointment. My mother's messages had dwindled, laced with forced optimism and hints of guilt, and Lauren had gone quiet altogether, and for that, I was grateful. But what caught my attention the most was the voicemail from my mother, left just the day before, her voice softer, hesitant, as if she wasn't entirely sure if she had the right to ask for anything from me anymore. Violet, she started, pausing for a moment as if waiting for some imaginary response. I know you don't want to hear from us right now, and I understand that. I do, but we're back home and I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to go back to the way things were. Another pause, and then softer, more vulnerable than I had ever heard her. I think we may have really lost you this time. I listened to the message twice, then 3 times, letting the words settle into my bones, feeling the weight of them, the realization that for once she was the one afraid of losing me rather than the other way around. I didn't reply. Instead, I put my phone away and stepped out onto the terrace of my hotel, watching the sun dip below the Roman skyline, feeling nothing but the steady hum of my own presence, my own certainty, my own self finally taking up space in a way I had never allowed before. For the first time I knew that whether or not my family ever truly changed, whether or not they ever saw me for who I really was rather than what they expected me to be, it didn't matter. Because I had changed. And there was no going back. The day before my flight home, I sat at a small outdoor cafe near the Trevi Fountain, sipping on a cappuccino as the early morning sun cast golden light over the ancient city, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses filling the air, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, not as a daughter trying to earn love, not as a sister sacrificing her happiness, but as me, just me, and that realization was both terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I knew the moment I landed back in the States, reality would come crashing in, the bubble of solitude I had carefully built in Italy bursting the second I turned my phone back on. But instead of dreading it, I welcomed it because this time, I was walking back into my life on my own terms, not theirs, not with the weight of their expectations suffocating me, not with the burden of their disappointment hanging over my shoulders. When I finally turned my phone back on in the airport lounge, the flood of messages came instantly. Unread texts, missed calls, voicemails, a desperation that had evolved from guilt to something closer to confusion, as if they couldn't quite fathom why I hadn't come crawling back, why I hadn't broken under the pressure of their absence, why I had continued living without them. I scrolled through the texts absent-mindedly, my mother's messages still caught between rehearsed regret and unspoken expectations. Mom, we need to talk, Violet. We can't keep going on like this. Mom, Lauren says she's done trying. She doesn't understand why you're being so difficult, and honestly neither do I. But I don't want to lose you. Mom, please just come home so we can fix this. I stared at the words for a long moment, not because I was tempted to reply, not because I felt guilty, but because it was the same message I had read 100 times before, just in different variations with different excuses, different ways to make me feel as though I was the one who had ruined everything when in reality they had done that all by themselves. Then there was my father, his messages shorter, more calculated, like he was assessing whether there was still a version of me he could reason with. Dad, I don't want this to be how our family ends. Dad, we can talk. Just us. No pressure. Dad, I won't beg, Violet. But don't make a mistake you'll regret. That one almost made me laugh because if anyone had regrets, it wasn't me. It was them, for realizing too late that the girl they had dismissed, the daughter they had overlooked, had finally learned to live without them. And Lauren? Just one message from her, sent a week ago, left unread until now. Lauren, whatever. I don't even care anymore. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. I exhaled slowly, staring at the delete button, my thumb hovering over it for just a moment before I pressed down, clearing all the messages at once, erasing them like they had never existed, like their weight had never been mine to carry. By the time I landed back home, I already knew what I was going to do. I wasn't going back. Not to their house. Not to their manipulations. Not to their conditions of love that had always come with a price I was no longer willing to pay. Instead, I walked into my apartment, set down my suitcase, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. A breath that felt like closure, like peace, like an ending that had long been overdue. I made myself a cup of tea, sat on my couch, and stared out the window at the city skyline, the world stretching before me, endless and open, and for the first time in my life I wasn't afraid of it, I was excited for it. Because I wasn't just returning home. I was finally truly free.